Of the European Parliament from the United Kingdom and the President of ADD. And our focus this evening with Roger communicating about post-Brexit, the next steps for the sovereign states within Europe, the United States, Israel, and India. Thank you, Roger, for joining us, and we appreciate your leadership from the very beginning, some 10, 12 years ago, when you convened the International Leaders Summit in the European Parliament.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Joel. Good evening, everyone, again. Delighted to be here. I don't know if any of you ever came across the Irish comedian Dave Allen, but he was a wonderful guy, and his main act was to sit by himself alone in camera with a microphone and with a glass of whiskey. I'm afraid I'm making do with red wine here. And then he would just deliver a kind of train of consciousness that would hopefully inform and entertain. We have a saying in England that those who forget the lessons of history are in danger of repeating them. So I hope you'll forgive me if I just do a quick resume of one or two of the points I made this afternoon to introduce the subject. We also have a saying, have we any historians here tonight? I hope not. We have a saying that history repeats itself, historians repeat each other. But I spent some time this afternoon, as those of you who were there will remember, talking about the background to Brexit, how it came about, and important part actually played, I think, by the party I represent, UKIP. We spent 20 years asking for a referendum on British membership of the European Union. Frankly, when we asked that question 20 years ago, people thought we were mad or thought we were some kind of weird esoteric group that had no relevance to the future of our country. So for us as a party, actually, first of all, pushing the then Prime Minister David Cameron into delivering the referendum at all, and we pushed him into it. He was frightened of us. He was also frightened of a small group of his backbenchers who were fully supportive of Brexit. But it was pressure from UKIP, actually, that pushed him into delivering the referendum. And absolutely, it was the feet on the ground from UKIP. We were the people overwhelmingly who knocked on the doors, who delivered the leaflets, who did all the ground campaign for Brexit. And I am convinced that we made a difference. And I don't suppose Bill Etheridge over there is going to disagree with me. We won by a small margin. If you hadn't had UKIP with tens of thousands of people out there working the ground campaign, it wouldn't have happened. So we're proud of what we achieved. As I mentioned this afternoon, we had a campaign before up to the referendum, which on the Remain side was immediately dubbed by the media Project Fear. Everything was going to go wrong. And they lined up all the key voices you can imagine from the World Bank and the IMF, and even George Soros, for heaven's sake, and President Obama, and the Bank of England, and the British Prime Minister, and the British Chancellor, and the CBI, our industry body, many of the trade unions, and they all said, if you vote for Brexit, terrible things will happen. They didn't say terrible things may happen 2 years down the road. They said immediately the sky will fall. Immediately the stock market will crash. Immediately unemployment will rocket. Immediately house prices will drop. That's a big deal in the UK because we've got quite a high level of home ownership and nobody wants to see their asset destroyed. And mortgage rates will go up. Many people are very stretched on their mortgages. Consumer spending will crash. Shops will go out of business, and so on and so on. And on all those measures, they were diametrically wrong. Not a bit wrong, but totally wrong. As I speak today, the FTSE 100 is close to record levels. It's over 7,000, which is pretty unusual. It's a fantastic result. Unemployment is down, employment is up, international businesses are moving to place their headquarters in the UK, and consumer spending is up, tourism is up. the news, generally speaking, on the economy is superb. And as I mentioned this afternoon, the only arguably negative statistic is that the pound is a bit down, less far down than it was immediately after Brexit. But many economic commentators are saying, well, it was overvalued to start with. Coming down is a good thing. Okay. We then had the amazing referendum itself. Sheila and I were actually at the Millbank Tower party organized by UKIP and some of our donors. And we were up there watching the news until late into the night. And I'm afraid, because I'm very elderly, I have to confess this, I went to bed before the result was out. I went to bed about 3:10, I think. And about 5 o'clock, I woke up and immediately looked at my phone. And do you know, we'd won? And I could not believe it. Well, I did believe it. So where do we go from here? And this is what Joel has asked me to talk about. When David Cameron launched the referendum, and during the referendum, he said, if the British people vote for Brexit, I will invoke Article 50 the next morning. I guess we all here know what Article 50 is. It's the article in the Lisbon Treaty which actually triggers the withdrawal mechanism for a member state. In fact, we always said that that clause was not there to be used. It was there as window dressing, so they could come to us Eurosceptics and say, you should support the Lisbon Treaty. There's actually a clause in it that allows you to leave. You want to leave, so you should vote for the Lisbon Treaty. Of course, they never expected it to be used. And what is very interesting is that it was drafted by a British civil servant working for the European Commission. And he has actually gone on record now to say, I wrote the clause, but I never intended it to be used, which is exactly what we believed. In fact, what David Cameron did the morning after, he did not invoke Article 50 as he had promised to do. Instead, he resigned, saying it was a decision for his successor and he would leave it. We then get Theresa May, and remember, Theresa May campaigned, but very quietly, for Remain. I don't like to accuse a British Prime Minister of cynicism, but I think she did a bit of tactical thinking. She said, how do I protect my position? The best thing I can do is to campaign for Remain, but very low profile. If Remain wins, hell, I'm a Remainer. I did the right thing. If Remain loses, well, I was never very enthusiastic about it anyway. Certainly that's her line now. She says she is committed to leaving, and I would like to believe her. She says she will invoke Article 50 by the end of March. She thought she could do it using a constitutional mechanism known as the royal prerogative. The first problem she's faced is a group of private individuals, one of them a city banker. Now, here I'm not sure of my facts. She was certainly not born British. She may be British now, but she is a rich hedge fund manager, and she has financed a campaign to get the High Court to declare that the British government cannot use the royal prerogative in this event and needs an act of parliament. Now, this is a dodgy constitutional area. One of the problems of an unwritten constitution is you don't always know quite where you are. It's also a real danger, which I'm sure our American colleagues will particularly appreciate, because the American founding fathers were very concerned about the separation of powers. What we have here is the judiciary being invited to rule on a matter which many people feel is actually a political matter for the House of Commons and for the government, the executive, not actually an issue for the judiciary. The High Court has already ruled in favor of the appeal, saying that we need an act of parliament. The government has appealed against that decision to what we call our Supreme Court, although of course it isn't a Supreme Court, because at the moment it's subject to the European Court of Justice. And we've had the hearings in the Supreme Court. We do not yet have the verdict. It's expected early next year. So we will know then whether Theresa May can simply declare or invoke Article 50, or whether she needs an act of parliament. In between, there has been a motion, but not an act, passed in parliament, where members of parliament have voted, in fact, to call on the government to invoke Article 50 by the end of March. That is an opinion of parliament. It is not yet an act of parliament, so it sort of doesn't quite exclude the decision of the Supreme Court. So my view is that if the Supreme Court rules that she can use royal prerogative, she will, and she will do it. If the Supreme Court rules that she can't do it, she will bring in a bill which will almost certainly be passed by the House of Commons, because the Labour Party has said that it will support it or will not at least oppose it. It may, however, be stopped in the Lords. Now, there are various options that the Prime Minister could take if it's stopped in the Lords. She could simply, on her own authority, appoint 500 pro-Brexit peers and put them in the House of Lords. When she did that, she could threaten the House of Lords and saying, if you force me to do this, I will also bring in an Act of Parliament to dissolve the House of Lords shortly afterwards, which might clarify the minds of their lordships before the event. What she could also do, and may do, is to call a snap general election, because we have a convention in British politics that if a party is elected to government on a manifesto which includes certain commitments, the Lords should not oppose those the implementation of those manifesto commitments. If they do, she can invoke the Parliament Act to force it through. So it's a bit complicated and messy, but I believe that she will be able to invoke Article 50. The much more interesting question, which is now arising, although it didn't arise in the original debate, is what exactly does Brexit mean? Now, Theresa May, being very helpful, has sought to clarify this because she's made a very clear statement. She said, Brexit means Brexit, which, as you appreciate, takes us a long way further forward. And let me explain the background to this. In my mind, Brexit is very clear. It means that we cease to be members of the European Union. We cease to accept any European Union regulation. We cease to contribute to the European budget. The fisheries in the North Sea are now subject to international maritime law, and so all those fisheries that were given away by Ted Heath in 1972 at the last moment to get us into the European Union become British fisheries again. We may make arrangements to allow other nations to fish in those waters, but they will do it for a fee and they will do it on our terms. So that is my understanding. Some people present this as a leap in the dark. This is jumping off the known bandwagon into the great wilderness out there. And when I remind them that the great majority of countries in the world are independent countries, and that Britain for most of its history was an independent country, the idea that it is some incipient disaster that we become an independent country seems rather curious. Israel is an independent country, India is an independent country, the United States of America is an independent country. Please somebody tell me why it's a problem for Britain to be an independent country too. But they are making that argument. One of the things that muddies the water is that there are two countries that have a sort of associate membership of the European Union. One is Norway, the other is Switzerland. Actually, I believe Liechtenstein is included in that list, but we won't worry about it now. The relationship they have is too complicated to go into in detail, but what it means is they are bound by some of the regulations, but not all of them. They are broadly bound by the immigration position, and they contribute to the EU budget. Now, some people are saying, well, maybe we want that sort of relationship. Some people are saying, well, okay, we're going to leave the European Union, but we wish to remain within the single market. That would give us improved single market access, but would require us to be subject to many European Union rules. Some people even say we should stay in the customs union. And as I mentioned this afternoon, the fact that the EU is a customs union is one of the main reasons we want to get out of it. And frankly, if we stay in the customs union, I cannot see for a moment what Brexit means, because we're no better off than we were before. We'll certainly have to pay into the budget. We certainly have to obey the rules. We certainly have to accept the free movement of people. It would be not Brexit at all. So that is the debate that is going on at the moment. I think the mistake which the government is making is that it is talking in terms of negotiating with Europe about the best deal we can get. And for me, that puts us in a supplicant's position. It puts us in the position of the little boy whose football has gone into next door's garden and he's knocking on the front door saying, please miss, can I have my ball back? And the chances are they'll say, no, go away and don't be a nuisance. What I would like to do ideally, and what UKIP's position is, and we would do if we were in government, we would actually not worry too much about Article 50. What we would do is we would pass a two-line bill in the House of Commons that simply repealed the European Communities Act of 1972. That was the act that took us in. If we repealed that and passed the repeal through the British parliamentary process, the effect would be that any further decisions made as a result of that act in 1972 would be null and void, and we would be an independent country. That isn't going to happen because, sadly, we're not in government right now, and that may take a little while. It's an ongoing project. But given that we think Article 50 is going to be repealed, what we would like to do is get on with it. Let's repeal Article 50, and let's bear one thing in mind. What is the worst case? When you go into a negotiation, you have to have in your mind, at what point will you walk away? And what is the worst case that you might have to put up with? I'll tell you what the worst case is. The worst case is that we become, as I say, an independent country, and that we trade with the European Union on WTO rules. Now, I think I'm right in saying that America trades with the European Union on WTO rules, broadly speaking, and Russia trades with the European Union on WTO rules, and so does China. And as it happens, China, Russia, and America are the largest suppliers of goods into the European Union. So it can't be that bad. And it's also worth, to give it perspective, the total duties that would be paid on current British exports into the EU, if we were trading on WTO terms, are about £3.5 to £4 billion a year, which is less than half of our current net budget contributions. So, okay, we don't want to pay those duties, but it wouldn't be a disaster at all, and we would then be free to do what we want to do, which is to set up free trade deals on a bilateral basis with many countries around the world. Delighted that Donald Trump is making warm noises about bilateral deals, and especially bilateral deals with the UK. But we want to talk to all the other countries. Just to qualify a quick point, people say, well, the European Union has free trade agreements with nearly 50 countries around the world. And this is true. And by the way, apart from Switzerland and Norway, those deals do not involve free movement. So when we get Europeans coming to us and saying, if you want to have free trade, you've got to have free movement, they go together. The answer is no, they don't. Look at our deal with Korea or many other countries. But people are saying to us, well, you'll lose all those deals. Where will you be? You'll be out in the cold, and all those deals you negotiated through the EU will be gone. Well, no, they won't be gone, of course. We'll go and sit down with the Koreans. I take that example because I worked in Korea for a number of years, and we'll say, for the moment, let's just keep on the terms we were with the European Union. Free trade both ways. How about that? And the Koreans will say, yeah, that's the easiest thing. We'll do that. And then in 2 years' time or 5 years' time, we can sit down with the Koreans and we can say, well, are we happy with the way it's going? Is there anything we want to change? And we can negotiate like people negotiate. The problem for the EU is, before it can negotiate a free trade deal, it's got to get agreement between 28 countries in the EU, all with different interests and different objectives, before it can even talk to the other guys that it wants to make an agreement with. So we will be in a position where we are able to make a free trade deal with the European Union. But why should we be the supplicants? When we leave the European Union, Britain will be the largest external customer of the European Union, bar none. We buy more from the European Union than America does, or any other country in the world. They cannot afford not to have a free trade deal with Britain. We import nearly 1 million German cars a year. Think of the unemployment in Stuttgart and other German cities where they have car manufacturing. I'm desperately trying. Munich, isn't it? BMW are in Munich and Mercedes are in Stuttgart. There will be unemployment in those cities unless they get a free trade deal. If the European Commission doesn't agree a free trade deal with Britain when we leave, then the chief executives of those companies and of French winemakers and a whole load of other companies, industries around Europe, they will be kicking the doors down in the Berlaymont building and telling the Commission, we want a deal. So we think that the British government should have a bit more backbone. It should get out there and say, we're leaving, we're invoking Article 50, we don't need to sue for terms, you need to come and talk to us about the sort of free trade deal you want, and if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. That is the position we ought to take, that is the position I hope we will take, and I think we will come out very strongly. Thank you very much.